Hi everyone, and welcome to this video on comprehension and short answers. Now this video is relevant to Year 11 ESL students and really surrounds the way in which you can use comprehension to your advantage in achieving high marks in your area of study. So, let's think about comprehension and short answers. Obviously, in ESL, this is a highly important part of your final exam. So today, we're really going to be breaking apart and dissecting the way in which you can answer these questions the absolute best you possibly can. So, when you first approach a comprehension question, you really need to break your time and your thoughts down into two main areas. The first area is to understand and analyze the text. Now this means firstly reading through the text, really understanding its meaning, and perhaps doing some annotations on the text to really make sure you've analysed it correctly and then can use this to answer your short answers. The second area then is to plan, structure, and write your answer. It's really important that you don't do this until you understand your text completely. So the first step is understanding it, and then the second step is really actually getting down to business and writing out your answer. Of course, if you have time, planning this is really important and will allow you to make sure you have a structured and logical response, which the marker is really going to enjoy reading. Now, comprehension may seem easy. However, teachers in ESL expect a high standard in comprehension, and therefore you really need to make sure you master the skills. It's really important that you don't spend all your time studying for your essay, because marks are at stake in the comprehension section as well, and there'd be nothing worse than achieving a really high mark in your essay and blowing marks in the comprehension section simply because you haven't studied, practiced, and prepared enough to be familiar with the style of question which they're going to ask you. The comprehension section is worth 25 marks. Now, this is so important because your essay is only worth 20 marks. So you're actually dealing with more marks in your comprehension than in your essay. So take that as you will, but really what that means is you need to be focusing on comprehension just as much, if not more, than your essay. It's really a skills-based exercise which you need to master. Today we're going to be focusing on a number of issues which are going to make sure that you can answer these questions really well. The first is structure. So firstly, how to structure your answers and also the different question structures which you might see in the exam. Secondly, the content. So how to take a text and really understand what the content is through all the things like language techniques and descriptive techniques which might adhere and make the meaning a little bit difficult to understand. The third is techniques. So how to take specific examples of techniques and then use these as backup evidence in your final work. So, when examining comprehension for the first time, there are some basic skills in order to achieve success. So, if you take these simple steps, it's going to be really easy to approach comprehension in a calm and ultimately a sophisticated way and produce a really high quality answer. We've already been over this when you've been looking at comprehension and also just the general area of study previously. However, if you take on board these steps, you're really going to benefit. The first step is to stay calm. Now, at the first, when you open your exam booklet, your text may seem a little daunting. These are texts which you've never seen before and which they're now expecting you to analyse and answer questions on. Bit scary. However, if you stay calm and just analyse things in a calm and orderly fashion, you're going to understand it and you're going to be able to write down your answers. The second step is to read the questions before you read the text. This means that you understand the keywords in the question, and then when you're reading through the text, your brain can subconsciously look for the answers. Thirdly, you should check how many marks the question is worth. This not only tells you how much detail you're going to be able to have to provide in your answer, but also tells you how much time you should be spending on your answer. This is really important because you don't want to be running out of time for the big questions because you spent too much time on 1, 2, and 3 mark responses. The fourth issue is to underline the important words in the question. This is going to make sure that you answer the question correctly and really have a direction for how you're approaching your short answer questions. The fifth step is to annotate key words in the question with smaller words. So sometimes the Board of Studies likes to show off and use really elaborate language in their questions. However, if you break that down, perhaps draw arrows and underline things with perhaps easier and smaller words which you understand, the questions aren't going to seem quite so daunting. Sixth, you mark key sections of the text which answer the question. This means that if you're running out of time, or even if you just need a bit of direction, you know exactly where to look. 7, you circle things which you don't understand. You can either look these up later if you have time, or come back to it and try to understand them a bit later on when you're not quite so flustered. So, now you've got those simple steps in place, we're going to look at the way in which you can analyse comprehension texts. Now, if you ask yourself these questions, I guarantee that even the most difficult and even the texts which seem the most complicated, you're going to be able to break down and write something about. So, let's look at these set of questions. They're going to help you to be able to move from really broad answers to questions with specific detail, quotes and examples, and that's what's going to be getting you the marks. You then need to make sure that you can at least say something about your text, even if you don't think you understand the whole thing. You'll have something written down on the page. So, you're asking yourself these questions. Firstly, what is the text? So you're looking at things like what's its text type. For example, is it a poem, a short story, a feature article, a novel, an extract from something? You're using this to your advantage because you understand all these text types from your studies in class and then can transfer this to your short answer responses. You're then asking yourself, how is it structured? So you're looking for things like title, pictures, paragraphs and stanzas, and rhyme or rhythm. All of these things are key elements of structure, which are going to give you a really good advantage in analysing these texts if you drop these sort of words in. They show the marker that you understand structure, which is obviously a very important element of your writing in English. You then ask yourself, what stands out? So you're looking for things like bold or large font, pictures, and strong language. These are things which might jump off the page and seem really obvious. Things that are obvious are often the answers to the questions. The things which are most prominent are the most obvious techniques which the composer's using, and therefore the things which you want to make sure you get down in your answers. You're also asking yourself, what are the main ideas? So in this section, things are going to be often repeated, and that's going to be the main idea. Also, you might be looking at things that are part of the title or that appear often as keywords, such as motifs throughout. The next step then is to move from a really literal level of basic understanding to a more deep level where you're really dissecting and analysing the text in a lot of detail. So here you're asking yourself, what are the connotations of the text? So for example, you're taking key examples and then thinking what they mean on a deeper level. So you're picking out key words and then asking yourself, what does this make me think of? For example, a teardrop, which is used in it, obviously is not just put there as a teardrop. It's a symbol of grief, depression, and sadness. These are the sorts of things which you can identify as techniques in your writing. You then ask yourself, who is the target audience for the text? So you can do this by asking yourself, is the language formal or informal? Is it intellectual or everyday? These are sort of things that are going to give you little hints into who the text is aimed at. For example, adults, school children, even younger children, high school students, anything like that. You then ask yourself, what is the purpose of the text? So is it to entertain? Is it to persuade? For example, to make sure that you persuade someone of your specific opinion of an issue which you feel really passionate about? Or perhaps it's an advertisement which is trying to persuade you into buying a product. It could be to educate. It also could be to show feelings and to really demonstrate the emotion of a person and to demonstrate to the reader exactly how you're feeling. This is particularly true in a diary entry or a journal, which is written in first person and wants to demonstrate their perspective and wants sympathy from the reader. You then ask yourself if you can spot any techniques, so any visual techniques or any language techniques, things which you can identify specifically to improve the quality of your response. So, let's take a look at this example and think perhaps how, if you got this picture in an exam, how you might analyse it. The first thing that jumps out for me when I see this picture is the large font. So that's something which jumps off the page and which you can definitely use as a technique. The large font here is representative of the most important idea on the page and stands out to grab the reader's attention, particularly relevant in an advertisement. For example, if this was in a magazine, you're flicking through the pages, you see this large font and you think, wow, that really stands out to me. That's a technique you can identify. The superlative language. So if you're reading the language, things which might seem over the top and overly persuasive, obviously they're in advertisements to persuade you to buy their product, they're things which you can identify. The second person. The use of the second person is where it identifies particular things like you. Now, by saying the language of you, that's obviously very persuasive because it's directly addressing you. If you're reading a page and it says, "Do you want to buy this?" you immediately feel like you're engaging with the text because it's specifically asking you a question. The next technique is the jargon. So jargon is language which is particularly relevant to a specific profession or group of people. So for example here, the mention of the Suzuki TS125 Duster is an indication of the fact that the people who are reading this must really have an understanding of motorbikes, and it's really appealing to people who like motorbikes and who want more motorbikes. You're also looking, for example, at the tough terrain on the ground. So you can use that as a technique to show that the bike is very hardy and strong, and therefore that it can get through this tough terrain really successfully. That's a persuasive technique. You're also looking at the positioning of the bike, so you can say the fact that the bike is in the foreground draws emphasis to the fact that the bike is the center of this page and the center of this advertisement. The tagline at the bottom, "Suzuki, built to take on the country," is also an indication of this. And you could perhaps even quote this directly to demonstrate that you understand the purpose of the advertisement and you understand that the purpose of this whole page is to sell a product to someone reading it. So, let's look at some tips for short answer responses. In ESL, it's really important that you don't just understand the text, but that you express your ideas in a sophisticated way. So, that means you're using full sentences to demonstrate that you are using language successfully, that you're constructing sentences, using words together, and overall demonstrating that yes, you do have a strong grasp of the English language. You're going to be using paragraphs, filling any lines provided, and making sure all your paragraphs have a strong 3 to 4 sentences at least in them. This is really going to demonstrate to the marker that you have a sophisticated understanding of the text and that yes, you can express your ideas in an extended way. The general rule is the more the better. Obviously, you don't want to be spending too much time answering comprehension questions if it means you're not going to get your essay done, but the more and the faster you can write and the better quality of what you can write, this is going to achieve better marks for you. If you use short sentences, that is a good way of increasing your expression. So if you are concerned about the fact that your ideas might get jumbled in long or flowing sentences, short sentences are often the way to go. Using keywords to open your sentences is also a really good way of getting the marker's attention. If you directly answer the question with a keyword and then go on to explain it, the marker's going to instantly give you a tick for mentioning that keyword and then another tick for explaining it. So that's a really good way of assuring you get high marks. making sure you watch your tenses. Obviously that's something which is important across the board, but it's definitely something which increases the sophistication of your answer. So if you use past tense, always using that. Present tense, always using that. Let's look at this checklist for structuring your short answer response. We begin with a topic sentence. Just as you would do in an essay, the topic sentence is a really good way of making sure that the marker knows what your answer to the question is going to be. We then look at a technique. So you identify a particular language or visual technique and make sure that the marker knows that you know what you're looking for. You then identify a quote, and this quote is a specific example from the text which demonstrates that you've read the text and have picked out key elements of it. You then explain this quote, so you don't just put the quote and the technique in, but really demonstrate the effect of that quote and technique on the reader, linking that back to your area of study theme. You then end with a conclusion. This can either be a sentence if it's a shorter answer, or perhaps a short paragraph if it's a longer answer response. Just wrapping up your answer and ensuring that you link it back to the question to get your marks. Let's look at some examples of question types. So, you really get a variety of different question types in your ESL responses. You can get short to medium answers. And this is a really good way to get your ideas going at the beginning of the paper when the mark value is lower. For example, in this question, which is worth 3 marks, how does Mathilde's characterization affect the consequences she experiences? So obviously you haven't read this text, but even so, looking at this question, you can clearly identify the key words. So if you underline the key words, this is what you should underline. How does Mathilde's characterization affect the consequences she experiences? So firstly, how is an indication that yes, you really need techniques in this answer to back up your response. Underlining characterization indicates that your answer is going to focus on Mathilde's character. Effect, you're really demonstrating a cause or effect idea. So saying that one thing will lead to another. And consequences, that means that you're going to go to the story and understanding what those consequences are, so what those events are. So what we've done here, you see, is take a question which uses a lot of long words, and just by breaking them up, understanding that the question is really quite simple. What it's asking you to do is take techniques and use these to demonstrate the way in which Mathilde's character affects the events of the story. So it's quite a simple question once you understand it. In this sort of longer response, you see, imagine a situation or event in which a person overcomes barriers which have prevented belonging. Here, you would underline imagine a situation. So in this, you see you're not drawing particularly from the text itself, but also really demonstrating a creative response. And that's something which we're going to be looking at in later videos. Overcomes barriers. This is a specific link to the belonging rubric and means that it's really directing you to answer the question in a certain way. Using ideas from at least one of the 3 texts, compose a diary entry as this person. So here you see that you're using ideas and themes, so you're using the text to inspire you. From at least one of the 3 texts, so you're choosing one of the texts at least to inspire you, to compose a diary entry as a person. So your response is an 8-mark creative response where you're writing a diary entry based on one of your texts which demonstrates the idea of overcoming barriers to prevent belonging. So again, by breaking down that question, you have a question which you can easily approach. And this is the technique which you can use over and over again. So, this brings us to the end of our lesson on short answers and comprehension. It's really important to remember that this is worth 25 marks in your exam, so grasping these skills and structures is going to take quite a daunting, unseen text task and making it one which is simple, easy and enjoyable to get you started in your ESL exam.